Yes, good afternoon all. Since the world's main crisis at the moment is obviously in the Horn of Africa, I don't need to tell anyone that. I thought it would be interesting to read the World Disasters Report with an eye on the Horn of Africa to kind of to see, did its analysis stand up? Did it touch on many of the right questions? And I have to say, I did actually read it from page 1 until the end. And the first thing that I found really interesting about it was it calls itself a World Disasters Report and doesn't get round to mentioning the word disaster until page 125. I find that really interesting. It spent 124 pages, pretty much, talking about the World Economic Order, the World Trade Organization, land grabbing, chronic malnutrition, all these kinds of politics, power, lots and lots of stuff that we humanitarians, in inverted commas, aren't really supposed to talk about. Are they right? Well, if we look at the Horn, we know that the causes of famine in the Horn are not really humanitarian problems at all. They are caused by war. And if we look at the war, we see that this is all about politics. It's about local politics. It's about regional politics. It's about international politics. We've only got to think about things like Ethiopian invasion of Somalia, the global war on terror and the impacts of that, to see that the starving child there, the causes, the tentacles go back very, very far. We know it's about inequality. We know that much, if not so much in Somalia, but in the neighbouring countries, most of the people who are suffering are pastoralists. And we pretty much know why they're suffering. It's because they've had their land taken away from them. In fact, when I say their land, the ones in Ethiopia don't have the right to claim land at all, because the government's very busy there in trying to give land away to sugarcane plantations and so on, because it's so-called free land. So again, we see there. I mean, we've had the plea made eloquently for small farmers. I hope that the plea for pastoralists would be included, obviously, as farmers. And we know that that is what has undermined their livelihoods, which were designed for years when sometimes it rains and sometimes the rains really aren't so good. So we move around with the kind of livestock that can cope. And when they're not allowed to move around, and when their land is taken from them, then when it doesn't rain, they're suddenly in problems. So far, kind of so good for the report. We could say that a disaster is not an aberration from a normal development pathway. A disaster is a feature of a development pathway in too much of the world. So in fact, the real disaster isn't this humanitarian crisis of, oh, a tsunami and oh, an earthquake. It's the fact that 3 million children die every year from malnutrition. Do the maths. That's something like a tsunami every month of dead babies. And if that's not a humanitarian crisis, that's not a humanitarian crisis. That's a crime against humanity. And yet, because it's not in one place and there isn't a big wave or a big earthquake, it kind of gets forgotten about. It's not forgotten, it's deprioritized. It's a development problem. It's not for the humanitarian people to deal with because we can't. And I think the answer to that, made very, very strongly by this report, is that no, humanitarian crises aren't neither the fault nor the responsibility of humanitarian actors. They're actually the responsibility and the fault of everybody else. And as I say, if we look at the Horn, I think the report passes that test pretty well. If we move on to food, then the report says that actually the problem isn't really about food at all. It's about people getting food. I mean, I don't suppose we could do the calorie balance oversimplistically, but if you've got 1 billion people hungry on this side and 1.5 billion overfed on that time, there is some vague suggestion that maybe it's not about the amount of food you've got. It's possibly more around how it's all being shared out. And the report says fairly strongly that it's actually not about supporting farming at all, it's about supporting farmers. And of course, including, if we're looking at the Horn, then we'd have to make sure that we include pastoralists, different kinds of farmers, but it's in there. And that has some far-reaching consequences, because it says it's actually not about, if it was about producing more food, it's dead easy. Many years ago, I was an agronomist, and I kind of learnt which chemicals you put on the soil to either make the plants grow bigger or the weeds grow smaller, and at the end of it, you know, you get more food. It's not hard. It's not about that though, is it? I mean, we've been doing that for 30, 40 years and hasn't really solved the problem, because the problem isn't technical. The problem is around, well, first of all, winners and losers. It's about power. Every time there is a winner, there's a loser. If we're helping the poor produce more food, then we are changing the market for those who are currently getting hold of most of it. I won't go into land rights, because when I start to talk about land, I'd be here for, you know, probably until tomorrow, and it's already been brought up. But it's about who gets the land. It's about when there are programs designed like subsidizers for fertilizers, who does that really help? And it's around trade. It's around trade that helps, not trade that hurts. And again, if we look at the Horn, is trade the answer or is trade the problem? Well, the answer is a little bit of both. It depends upon which kind of trade you're looking at. And what we have not had in place in the Horn are trading systems which support livestock production, which support livestock exports, huge market regionally and in Saudi Arabia and so on. And instead, markets are being designed to make sure that all the trade passes through one or two ports where those in power can tax it and get their cut, and they do everything to prevent any other kind of trade going on. So if we look at problems of the Horn, say that the report pretty much, although it obviously didn't have the Horn necessarily in mind, the analysis pretty much illustrates what's going on there. I suppose we ought to mention nutrition, since the report's title somewhere does have malnutrition in it. This is a bit of a harder one, actually, malnutrition, because we don't really quite know what to do about it, which doesn't mean we don't know what to do about it. It means we don't know what to do about it. What I mean is that it's been fairly well documented that there are some basic solutions which nutritionists know about and know how to do. And if those were properly implemented at scale, it's been, according to the Lancet, who know a lot more about these things than I do, that would solve 1/3 of the world's malnutrition, which obviously raises two interesting questions. First of all, that's a million fewer dead babies. That's pretty big. Why isn't it happening? And the second question is, what about the other 2 million? And we don't really have an answer for either of those two questions. Why the other 2 million? Whose responsibility is that? It's the responsibility of healthcare, it's the responsibility of clean water, it's the responsibility of livelihoods, food security. And none of us, I suppose I kind of class myself on the food security livelihood side, we're not taking our responsibility seriously. We refuse to accept that nutrition should really be one of our objectives. We'll say, for example, yeah, but what's the correlation really between nutrition and food security? And is really the only goal of improving food security to improve malnutrition? It's like, well, shouldn't it be? Isn't that really kind of one of the most important things that we could actually do with our lives, trying to bring that number down? But we can't do it, and I think there's some subtle reasons, and one of the reasons is that whatever people's food security or livelihood, we can't guarantee good nutrition, because that depends on lots of other things, like the mother's caring practice and the water and so on. And then we get ourselves into this problem, well, if I can't deliver it, I can't put that down as a deliverable in my little, you know these log frame boxes, where you have to tick and say, I did it. Well, I daren't put anything down in that box that I can't be sure I can tick. So I'll make sure that I only do stuff that I can tick at the end, not stuff I can't tick at the end. And it's little things like that which mean that although I know it's really important, there's no way I'm ever going to take responsibility for it, because I can't guarantee I'll deliver on it, and therefore it all gets forgotten. And you would think that there's enough clever people in the world who would kind of be able to work out a system of box ticking that would enable 2 million children not to die every year, but we haven't quite come up with it yet. Moving on to Humanitarian Response, which I think is page 100, what did I say? Page 125. What does it say about humanitarian response, and how does that chime in with what's going on at the moment in the Horn? Well, there's been a lot of analysis in food security, a lot of investment, in food security analysis, which has got much more sophisticated, I think, and in particular in early warning, which has got very much more sophisticated than it ever was. which leaves the question, are we actually responding any better than we ever used to? And there are some rather big questions about that. First of all, early warning did pick up the current crisis in the Horn a very, very long time ago. Not something we want to go into. It's been debated before. It's been well said and often repeated by now. We knew about this more than a year before it happened. It would have to be admitted that we didn't actually quite see it coming in all its severity, because there were far more dots to join up than we realised. Because these, things do get quite complicated on, world food prices, movement, and so on. But we had enough dots joined up to know that things are going to be pretty serious, and we didn't respond. That's one problem. Another problem is that, yes, we're analysing, but we're still basing all of our analysis on improving our needs assessment. And that's not quite the same as analysing a problem, looking at what the causes are, and working out how to address it. There was an interesting quote in the report that I actually did stop and look at and reread 2 or 3 times, which so one of these cliches of cartoons, isn't it? You kind of stop and look. And I actually did it literally for the first time for a long time to check I got it right, which was that the new tool, the IPC, integrated phase classification. For those of you who don't know it, it's a new way of making sure that we all stand it. When we say famine, we all know exactly what that means, so we can compare, and when we say a crisis, we know what that means, and so that's fine. And the people setting it up, quote, called for a specific step of response analysis to be included in response. So it's like 2011, and we're kind of finally getting around to the idea that maybe we should be analysing before we respond. Now, I mean, it is stunning. In what other sector would we have a call for thinking about what we do before we do it in a multi-billion-dollar industry with millions of lives at stake? So I did kind of find that quite striking. And it does seem as though the report has hit a few nails very, very firmly on their heads around impact. Do we know how good a job we're doing? If we don't know how good a job we're doing, how are we ever going to get it better? So, having previously said that the humanitarian response is not the cause of the problem, it still does seem as though there's a lot more we could get better. There are some encouraging signs. The fact that there was early warning predicting the crisis when in the past there hasn't been is a good sign. The fact that it's been a very, very long time since we've had a famine. And famines really still only happen in areas where we actually don't know what to do. Like Somalia, in the middle of a war and you can't get there. With the best will in the world and the best early warning, what the hell do you do about it? So we've actually limited the very, very worst to the cases that we don't, we have very good reasons for not knowing what to do about it. So I think things are getting a lot better, but there's a long way to go. I better finish. Let's have a quick look at the challenges which the report leaves us. And we'll leave these hanging because I'm not going to solve I'm not paid enough to solve all the challenges for you today. First challenge is nutrition, and that's got to remain on the table until we have solved the problem of 3 million children dying a year from malnutrition. Then there's work to be done, and we haven't got that. We're nowhere near getting that one right yet. That's the first challenge. No more to be said on that. The second challenge is on resilience, which we can call, the prevention side of things. And there are a lot of challenges hidden there. It's very easy to say we need to focus more on resilience, and that it is the big buzzword, as you know. Everyone's talking about resilience, but there's some hidden challenges in there, because first of all, it's actually not, the people calling for resilience are the humanitarian actors, and it's not about us at all. So how do we, as humanitarian people, so-called, it's in our title at least, how do we get the others to take on what they think is our responsibility? That's the challenge. It means completely rethinking development, really, at local level, because at the moment, development is all around, you've described it very nicely, it's all around getting the food out. And we've got to rethink that, and actually, we're in a world of climate change and price changes. We've got to actually help people cope with a changing world, and we're not very good at that. We're much better at telling people how much fertilizer to put on their cabbages rather than telling them how to analyse future trends in vegetable prices to be one step ahead of the game in knowing what varieties and what crops to be planting. It means thinking about power and politics, and we don't like doing that, partly because we don't know how to do it very well, and partly because we're uncomfortable. we're quite happy standing at a very big distance and sloganizing. You know, let's dismantle the WTO. But when we get closer to power, we kind of quite like being friendly with it. And that's not an easy one. Now, that's a genuine I'm not being flippant in any way or cynical here. That's a really hard challenge. There's a very, very deep challenge for the humanitarians as well. And this one, I think, is very deep for the Red Cross, especially the international committee of the Red Cross, and they're not the same thing, but there's an important link there, which is that if we say that crises are actually political, and they're about power, and they're all long-term, and it's really all about development gone wrong, how do we... That's political. And the kind of development we do is geared partly by politics. And yet humanitarian assistance is supposed to be based on need alone and completely apolitical. How do we square that one? I don't know. That's a challenge that I'm going to leave you with. Finally, there is a small challenge, just kind of in case we'd forgotten it, of fixing the humanitarian response system, which currently doesn't work. And we know why it doesn't work. We know that it doesn't work. The Horn has been yet another example, yet again, of that fact. Because there isn't a system. There's lots of people running around doing what they can do, and no one actually standing there making sure it functions as a system. We know what to do, but we don't actually have any tools for all moving together to get a system response. And with that small challenge, I'll leave you.
Thank you.